There we go. Hi, I'm Jim.
And I'm Kevin.
And we are
the Signal Brothers. Hey, welcome to another episode of Signal Brothers. Whose lock is it anyway? So we're here. Well, I'm glad I was the only one watching there for a second. We're going to have to edit that, Jim. I guess there's a delay in the thing. So welcome to the Signal Brothers. Whose lock is it anyway? Hey, listen, we got a special guest on today. His name is Emilio Alexander. He's going to introduce himself, was born in Panama. And, this is going to be an interesting discussion about the Chinese influence in the Panama Canal and Trump's statement about we're going to retake the Panama Canal. We're going to be talking about the history of the Panama Canal. And I just want to remind people when they join in, hey, just remember, hey, we love to get comments. We do see your comments as they come in live. We'd love to answer your comments. And, hey, if you want to be on the Signal Brothers podcast, reach out to either Jim or Kevin. Let us know you want to be here. We'll interview you just like we did Emilio. If you're passionate about something, it doesn't matter what your perspective is. If you're passionate, want to get on here and talk about a subject that's near and dear to your heart, we'd love to have you on the Signal Brothers. Without further ado, let me introduce Emilio Alexander. Hey, good morning, Emilio. How are you?
Good morning, Kevin. Emilio. Good morning, Jim. Glad to be here.
Welcome. Yeah, hey, glad to have you. Hey, listen, for the folks watching, Emilio, why don't you tell us a little bit about you, your background, where you're born, raised, your what you've done in the U.S. Give us just 2 or 3 minutes about your background.
Okay. Well, as Kevin and Jim, Kevin said, my name is Emilio Alexander. I was born in Panama, St. Thomas Hospital. My father became a naturalized American citizen when I was about 2 years old. I grew up till about age of 6 or 7 with my grandparents in Panama for a good while, until my father got stationed stateside. Then, of course, he got stationed at North Carolina, Fort Bragg, North Carolina, and I was a military dependent during that time. But most of my time in Panama has derived from the time I was in elementary school to about first grade, and then I went back. My father got stationed there when I was about 16 years old. So I graduated Balboa High School in Panama. Had a lot of good friends that going to Balboa High School that are Panamanians and also lived in the Panama Canal Zone. Their parents were part of the Panama Canal Zone during that time. I also joined the military in 1987. Did 22 years of service. Traveled the world. Married my beautiful wife, Luby, who I met in Germany. And I've traveled back, and then been retired since 2008 from the military, and I travel back and forth about every year to Panama. I went last year. I haven't gone this year at all yet. But my intention is to go sometime this year, go back and see. It's great to go back and visit some family members that I still got there. Don't have many, but have some family members still there. Got a lot of friends too.
Thanks for that. So, Emilio, why are you passionate about this subject, the Panama Canal? What's driving your passion to come on to the podcast today and talk about that?
I think my passion for that is because there's a lot of misconceptions about, like the title, who really owns the locks, the history. People know about the canal, but they don't know the history of how. It's not something that's really always taught in American schools. But that's something that we probably learned in high school in Panama and Balboa High School when we learned some of the U.S. history. That's like, how the canal was built, how it was started, and why. Um, I want to help people understand the reason for the Panama Canal, the true reason it was built, and what it represents then, and what it should really be representing now.
Perfect. So, in doing this, why don't we talk about the initial attempts to build the canal? Emilio, give us a little details about the history of the Panama Canal, the initial attempts.
So as I would say is most people don't know the U.S. was not the first ones to actually start construction on the Panama Canal. In 1880, the French started building of the Panama Canal, but the issue became very hard for them because it was financing, but I don't think the financing was what was really hurting them as much as the fact that malaria was killing a lot of people. Um, there was a doctor named Gargas. I forgot his first name, but Gargas, there's a hospital in Panama named Gargas Hospital, which was a military hospital, which was turned over in 1999 or 2000 to the Panamanian people. That hospital was named after him because he was the individual that created the vaccine that could be used, for malaria to help, you know, with the mosquito infection that was going on during that time. So once the French left Panama, that was a kind of understanding between the French and the Colombia, because Panama was actually owned by Colombia. Panama in 1903 tried to fight for their own rights and freedom. So November 3rd is considered Panamanian Independence Day, and so during 1904 the Theodore Roosevelt reached out to Panama uh, and signed a treaty to help finish and construct the Panama Canal. I think that construction was really based on the fact that, they wanted access for American warships to be able to get from the Pacific, from the east, from the west side, from the Pacific Ocean to the Atlantic Ocean faster, limiting the time that it will take American ships to be able to interact, um, naval ships to interact in wartime efforts.
Yeah, one of the things it's good that you bring up about the fact that Panama was part of Colombia. President Roosevelt, right? He used gunboat diplomacy
Yes,
to kind of strong arm Colombia. Wouldn't you agree,
Yeah.
Jim?
Yeah, it was. We helped stage a coup for all intents and purposes. I mean,
Yeah. Yeah, so
that's
there was a
exactly
treaty
right.
signed. Yeah, there was a treaty signed, right? But it was we were working with Colombia at first, and we couldn't get Colombia to cooperate, so we pivoted to the Panamanians when you guys became your own separate sovereign nation based on that. So that's an interesting background, right, of how
Mhm.
Colombia established its independence.
Mm.
Let's talk about a little bit about the construction, Emilio. Tell us about the construction.
Well, okay, so Panama is basically has three locks. One on the Pacific side, one basically towards kind of sort of towards the middle, and then you have your last lock, which is the Miraflores lock, which goes towards the Pacific side. You got the Atlantic side. Um, you have in the middle an area that's called the Gatun Lake. Now, Gatun Lake is basically those are the Gatun locks. Those that area that is really fresh water. It's fresh water intermixed with salt water. So if you ever go on the Gatun Lake, you'll see where the ships pass by, and there's an area where, because the ships travel through that area, there's an area where you'll see clear water intermixing with the salt water, and it's really kind of very murky because the water never settles because the ships go through there. Therefore, when the ships come through there, they stir up the bottom because they only have a certain amount of depth. Uh, and so there's a lot of times where there's excavations being done to keep the dirt, because dirt slides down from the hills down in there. The locks are made so that each lock, when the boats go through, and it takes quite a bit. It doesn't take a lot of time, but you can sit there about 30 minutes. It depends. The boat will come in and it will raise up to the next level of the next lock, and then that lock will open up, and sometimes it's three. Miraflores has three locks where it comes in from the Atlantic or uh, Pacific side, and they'll come in at sea level. They'll close the lock behind it. It'll raise up to the second lock. Once it raises up to the second lock, the water's level. The third lock will open up. It'll go in there, it'll raise up again. And then once it goes, the ship will go through and it'll go all the way through just like that till it gets to the next lock. And then when it gets to the other end, they'll go through a stage where they actually start going down.
Might help if I take my mic off of mute, huh, Emilio? So, Emilio, initially two locks were built, right? And the Americans went
Yeah.
and built a third series of locks, right, for the transit of ships, right?
Just recently.
And
Yeah.
yeah, so the Americans built the whole entire thing, right? Operated it, maintained it, right, from 1914 when they opened up all the way
Correct.
till 1999, right?
hmm
Let's talk about what happened in 1979. What happened in 1979?
Well, it really goes a little bit before 1979 to give you a little history. So the university students in Panama, Panama, I'll say the average amount of money probably made by a Panamanian now, income monthly is probably about $600, according to, I'm saying because of family members that I have there. So an American probably go down there and live with $1,200. But during that time, university students that were attending university in the 60s and part of the early 70s, before 79, there was a lot of unrest. There was a lot of protests against the Americans because these students were graduating from colleges and universities and couldn't get employment. They were left with, I guess, death, from going to school, couldn't get employment. So their first thought was, hey, it's like Yankees go home, gringos go home. Um, they were very upset because they felt like they weren't being represented in the fact that this is their country, but a lot of the jobs were going to the people on the Panama Canal. And so Americans will come and get jobs over there on the canal because they spoke English or wherever the case might be, and they weren't able to get jobs themselves. So that's why, and they were pretty upset with the government, with the Panamanian government for not um looking more out for their benefit.
Okay. And in the 70s, right, you would have been there growing up, so you got to observe that firsthand, correct?
I was born in '67, so there were times when my grandmother would take me to school. I go to school like by Ankong. There was a school that I went to was Hong Kong Elementary School, which was right next to Gargas Hospital, and right around where you can see there's a building called the Panamanian Administration Building. During that time, there was actually that administration building was ran by the Panama Canal, so and the U.S. Had the U.S. flag flying there. So that was the building where you would see a lot of the demonstrations and people. I mean, massive amount of people. Like it's a really big hill. It's like going to Capitol Hill and that whole area being flooded with people is basically what you saw demonstrating. They were down there taking down the U.S. flag and burning the U.S. flag and things like that. So yes.
All right, so let's talk about 1979. What happened in 1979, Emilio, that changed the direction of the Panama Canal as we know it today?
Well, that's 1979 because the treaty was signed in 1979. Jimmy Carter felt that it was in the best interest of the United States government to give the Panama Canal control of the Panama Canal. Now, this treaty, this 1979 treaty, was signed between Omar Torrijos and Jimmy Carter. Now, Omar Torrijos, Panama during that time was a dictator. So we had a president, but the general was basically ran the country. So Omar Torrijos um, and Carter got together to sign this to give control back to Panama in the year 2000. Now, mind you, we had a lot of bases there. You had Fort Gulick, you had Fort Davis. Those are more towards the Atlantic side. You had Fort Kobe. You had Fort Clayton. You had Rodman little naval base in Rodman, and then you had Howard Air Force Base, and you had Albrook Air Force Base. But Albrook, it kind of stopped planes. It was changed more to a area where they sent pilots from different um, Latin American countries to go down there to get training. So when that time took place, when they signed over the whole treaty, and actually a little bit earlier than that, in 1999, the U.S. military started dispersing. Started getting rid of bases, started slowly withdrawing out of Panama, and but remember, there was also a situation before that in 1989 when we had Just Cause, right? Um, it really, that part of the whole thing was now you had Noriega, who was a dictator. And at that time, Panama did have a military force, but there was issues with the way the country was being ran, and some of the causes was Noriega worked for, quote unquote, the CIA, had a lot of information, and Noriega he was dangerous. So in order to settle some of the things that were going on in Panama, they had to go in and take him out, and they did. And now Panama, because of what happened then, Panama no longer has a military. They basically have a police force, and now you have the president uh, running the country. Um, so what it did was give Panama control of the Panama Canal, but after the United States left out of in shortly not after they left out, but even while they were there, we had some foreign influences come in. You know,
All right. Before we get to foreign influences, though, a couple things, though. While
yeah,
Jimmy Carter did get that through Congress and get the treaty approved, right, it was a slim majority,
yeah.
very slim majority, right? And the Republicans disagreed, absolutely disagreed with this move. They were pretty vocal about it. Jim, what's your take on that?
Yeah, I mean that was an ongoing dispute for a long time, and when he signed that treaty in '79, it was pretty unheard of to have put that much capital, that much venture, and that much time into something like that just to turn it over. Now, of course, it took 20 years to actually do the turn it over to them because it wasn't effective until 20 years later. But yeah, they were not happy about it. We were stood to lose a lot of revenue because some of the fees for those ships going through there, even in '79, were just staggering, and we stood to lose all that profit, all that money for that. Not to mention, we would stand to lose some of the control we had. We're not at the top of the heap. We're not going to be the first. If you know the guy, you can get through easier, right? We're going to lose that as well. And it opened the door to foreign influences, like you mentioned a moment ago. So there were several concerns about that.
Quick question. So when we say that, you're right, there are several concerns in that aspect. But when we look at it from a structural and financial obligation, yes, the United States did help the cause of the Panama Canal being built. Now, that was of great interest to the United States,
Mm-hmm.
which I agree with. But my total belief is just because I own a home and somebody comes in my home and repairs something, that doesn't make that individual the owner,
That's a
right?
good point.
So they brought it back and gave it back to the Panamanian people. I think the issue is the interest, like the issue basically is who are the individuals that are now become a risk to the United States. You don't want Russia in there,
Mm-mm.
right? You don't want them in there. You don't want your foreign adversaries, lurking
About
in
China.
there.
China's the
Yeah,
one that's
yeah,
got
yeah.
the
China's
influence.
Yeah.
just exactly. You don't want China lurking in there. But when we go into, and I'm not going to go ahead, but when we go into it, I will bring something else up on in that matter. We'll just stick to the issue now. But yes, you're absolutely right. But like I said, I just bring out the point. We never want somebody coming into our house and telling us what to do in our home.
Right.
So,
Well,
in retrospect to that, is if we have a treaty, I think everybody has to come to the table and say, hey, this is what we have. This is a document we have, and we need to each follow this document to make sure that everybody is on an even level and everybody's happy.
right. Well, you made a good point a moment ago when you said that, with the Panamanians down there going to school and trying to get jobs, and we have this huge endeavor, and they can't get a job there. And then they watch foreigners come into their country and get jobs where they can't. Yeah, I see that as being a very, very big point for the Panamanian people.
Look
And
at it this way.
while I agree with Emilio, with both of you saying, right, we're one of the largest investors in Panama. Do you know that we give Panama about $3.8 billion a year in economic investments, right? To in foreign aid, right? And so, while I definitely agree with everything being said, I definitely think, right, that we're providing enough financial infrastructure to develop that country, right, to help develop that country and provide opportunities for Panamanians to work. Would you not agree with that?
Not necessarily, and I'm going to explain why. When during that time, when the United States actually controlled Panama, um, let's look at something that either or both all two of us or all three of us should know. The status of forces agreement. Let's use you. I want to use Europe just for really quick as an example. So if I go to Europe to work, anybody that's hired over there working for the Americans, there's a certain percentage of people that have to be hired. Same kind of thing follow for in the Panama with the Panama Canal, but when US was there. Okay, the big jobs that people are looking for, that individuals are going to school for, maritime service, learning how to be a captain on a ship. Those ships right now, majority of those captains that make that kind of money and the engineers that work there during when the United States controlled that, none of them were Panamanians. If there was, it was maybe 1%. And I think that's one of the things that those students were complaining about, because a lot of them were going to school for those to get those type of jobs. Um, and that's what kind of hurt the whole system or hurt those individuals. Now, with the U.S. turning over everything, it's more of an equal playing field. You still got Americans there that are working, engineers that are, in hindsight, giving um, valuable information, valuable lessons learned about things that, you know, about the Panama Canal to help keep the structure and help keep the Panama Canal up to date. And as far as when Kevin, when you mentioned the money infrastructure, um, I wouldn't know why we as a country in Panama would need the Panamanians would need that money still, because um, I don't even know if any of that infrastructure money was actually used to build the railroads, the metro system that they have now, that I have discussed with you in the past. You got the underworld. I don't know, but I do know that the Chinese influence was part of that little money that helped. Panama makes about $8.5 billion in money that comes through that canal.
Understood. So we're really getting to the heart of the conversation, right? And the meat and potatoes
Money.
now, Emilio. So,
Always
you know,
the heart, money. Yeah.
yeah. So,
I read
do you, go ahead, Jim.
I read that there's some of these ships that go through there, these giant cargo ships that go through there. Their fees can be as much as $500,000 or $500 million, excuse me. And that is immense. That's a huge amount of money to let one ship through. It's like, okay, well, now it kind of makes sense as to why our imported goods cost so much, But and you figure if right now, I think at their height, they were letting 38 ships through a day. And I think because of different reasons, they're down to, I think the last I heard was like 21 ships a day go through there now. And if you have those kind of fees, 21 ships a day, 365 days, that math gets pretty big, pretty quick. That's a lot of money changing hands.
And the other thing, Emilio, is that from my perspective and the research I've done, majority of the ships transiting the Panama Canal, right, are for the U.S. So the U.S. is providing majority of that money to the Panamanians to transit the canal, on top of the $3.8 billion a year we're giving to Panama in economic investments.
And who is the second largest? China.
Well, it's got to be the Chinese.
It's the Chinese, yeah.
Yeah. So let's talk about the Chinese, because that's an issue for me, right? That the Chinese are there, right? And
Chinese are everywhere.
They're everywhere, right? The Chinese are everywhere. But we got to look at the fact that the Chinese have been owning ports around at the entrance of both sides of the Panama Canal since 1979, right? But the Chinese have been there. But what was the Chinese influence in the world in 1979? Nothing compared to what it is today.
No.
Right?
Correct.
So the Chinese control a port at both the Atlantic entrance and the Pacific entrance, right? And
that is
I
correct.
think that's the large concern, right? That they're controlling those ports and could literally bring the Panama Canal to a screeching halt if they really wanted to.
No, there's 5 ports. They control one on the Atlantic side and one on the Pacific side. There's a total of 5 ports. But I think those may be the 2 biggest ports. I think we have to go back to before the Chinese were controlling those ports. There was actually a contract between the Panamanian government and Taiwan. So the Taiwanese, and as you know, Taiwan is considered part of China, but they try to, they do more so what business with the United States, and China doesn't like that, right? With that being said, uh, the Chinese company that invested into those ports somehow bought those ports out or offered more money to Panama in order to get control of those 2 ports. A lot of that money is not invested, came from different banks, but this is, look, I'm going back a little too far, but they did invest, from different banks. We'll catch up on that one because that has to do with when Jim brought up before a while back when we had a conversation prior to this, which had to do with the third building of the larger lane.
Yeah, the third lock.
The third lock, correct.
Yeah.
But Taiwan had the contract for those two ports, originally. And I think sometimes when words are said like, well, the Chinese are overtaking the Panama Canal, China's always been involved in Panama. And I'm not saying with the canal itself. I mean, we have a lot of Chinese people in Panama. They own the bodegas, uh, quite a bit of them, family ran. Just like you come here, you go to the Chinese restaurant. Guess what? It's family ran.
So, so
Laundromats.
yeah. So let me ask you a question, Emilio.
Yeah.
Are the Panamanians mad that the Chinese are running all this stuff and don't provide them an opportunity? I mean, for economic growth and prosperity in their own country?
I run. Are you talking about we're talking about the ports, correct?
I'm talking about bodegas. I'm talking about everything that the Chinese are doing there, right? So, I
Well,
mean,
I
there was a
mean,
time where the Panamanians were mad at the U.S., right, for
correct.
had control. Now you have the Chinese with a significant influence in the country.
I think the influences are a little bit different, Kevin, in a sense like the example I want to use is, and I'm just using it as an example, like here in the United States, people say, hey, well, we got foreigners coming and taking over certain jobs. And those are jobs or things that either some Panamanians didn't have enough money to do, but the bigger stores, like the wall, there's a store, like it's called the Super 99 that Martinelli, who used to be the president, owns all of that stuff, right? He has his own legal issues, but you look at that, and yes, you got Panamanians working in there. These stores are bought by these Chinese folks. They hire their own families to work in the stores. Um, the same thing you kind of see like what they do here in the United States. They got a Chinese restaurant. Is their family members and working there? And what do? Save up all their money? It's just a different culture. Their culture is family work like this. They work together, and other cultures are like, okay, well, each their own. Hey, you're gonna grow up, Emilio, and you're gonna get your own job, and you're gonna look to open your business. And you're gonna hire all your family members. You might hire some friends. You're gonna hire people that that are gonna come and do the job. They're gonna hire within because that's within their culture.
Yeah, well, I get that. Yeah, but there's also a certain level of prestige in owning a gateway through the modern world.
Yeah.
He who holds the keys holds the power, and
And
that's one of the seven wonders of the modern world is the Panama Canal. And I mean, you think about it. If you pull a few ships in and you put them around Central America, form a blockade, commerce
Mhm.
stops, which would
It, it,
also cause the Panamanian people to suffer.
you are
Everyone would.
absolutely correct about what you're saying where commerce stops. Now, there is there's the Panama Canal. There is a railway that was built. I don't know exactly the time, a few years years back. It was actually used prior or during that time that from the Pacific side of Mexico to the Atlantic side of Mexico, because when they were thinking about when they were going to build this canal, what was one of the ways that they did? Now, they built that road. They just recently, I guess, remodeled or redid or restructured that railway. So there is ships there and a port. And guess who owns those ports and those ships on both sides of those railway? You're going to say there's one in Mexico, Chinese owns that. There's another one in Honduras. The Chinese owns that. There's another one below the Panama Canal in Colombia, and the Chinese owns that. Now, in the grand total of things, they don't even average out to the $8.5 billion income that the Panama Canal does. They average somewhere, I think, close to more like 5 billion, which or a small amount, but not that big. And then you look at the United States and you look at the structure. Does the United States really need the Panama Canal? We got the west to the east.
100% we need it, Amelia.
Oh, I
100% we
mean,
need it.
yes,
40% of the ship traffic
shipment.
that passes through the Panama Canal either is leaving or entering the United States.
Correct. Leaving or entering the United States. Most of that stuff, a lot of that stuff is traveling from, if it's leaving the United States and it's got to get to the West Coast, can it be traveled through train? I mean, you're going to spend money, even if you put it on a ship. I can probably get more things on a ship than I can sending trucks, um, filling up the highways and the railways, and safety issues with, like, you get trains that have issues or whatever. We've had accidents in the past in the United States. The ship is probably the most safest way to go around, correct? But what I'm saying basically is, if the canal wasn't there, the United States would still operate. You know who would hurt more than anybody else? The Chinese.
Yeah, I disagree
Because
with you there. I absolutely
because they could
100% disagree with you there.
they couldn't get they would not be able to get their stuff through the canal. They would have to go all the way down South America. It would cost them more money.
Understood.
Yeah,
But
that's
I'm
literally
not saying I'm not saying financially it would hurt them more. But
yeah, that's
but
literally three
it
times the distance. It's
yes.
three times the distance to go around to go down below South America, and that so it's the Straits of Magellan. I
Mhm.
mean, the winds and waters there are rough, and I mean, it's a bad way to go,
So,
but it can be done.
so it takes approximately from New York to San Francisco 11 days, at least 11 days traveling through the Panama Canal. That same from New York to San Francisco, if you have to go down south, is 100. I mean, it's 27 days.
Hmm.
It costs each one of those ships roughly about $10,000 in fuel per
Yeah,
day.
yeah, and if you're talking about perishables, yeah, that's out of the question.
Yeah,
so that goes back to the point about what we're trying to talk about how
correct.
important it is to the United States. The United States has the largest number of ships transiting that canal, right? So the most investments, and yet the fees are just going through the roof to transit the canal, right? And that is a concern, right? And it takes money to operate the canal, but it also, we're the ones that are paying a majority of the fees. The United States is.
I believe I heard the president of Panama state that the fees are not no higher for the United States than they are for any other country.
See, I watched an interview with some folks from Panama last night. I can't remember when it was, about a couple of months ago, or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But a representative from president's office and that thing, and they were saying the exact same thing. And no, the fees aren't different. No, the fees aren't any higher for the United States than are for anybody else. And it goes back. That's great and everything, but it goes back to the thing that we say here. How do you tell when a politician is lying?
You can't.
Yeah, their lips are moving. So I
Well, the
mean,
lips are always
they
moving.
are
Come on.
saying that. You're absolutely right, Emilio. They're saying that, but I mean, we're not seeing any evidence of that. So I'm not spending a whole lot of brain power on that because we can't prove it or disprove it at this point.
And I think you're right, totally right, Jim. And it goes same way on both sides.
Hmm.
Um, we can't prove what our government is saying versus what their government is saying. I mean, it's just ridiculous that we're in this position in the first place
Hmm.
for both countries, right? So it would have to be one of those things where, you know, people have to use common sense, which, what do you think is right? And to Kevin's take, I agree. China probably has a little too much, with all those railways that they have. Why would you want to invest and be somewhere where you're going to create conflict?
Hey,
Yeah,
we got a question
we
or a
do.
comment from
Yes.
in the chat. Let's bring it up. It says, and this is a great question. It says, would finding alternative methods of routing goods have a significant impact or effect on Panama's economy? In other words, if we started routing through other areas, what's that going to do to Panama's economy?
It would
Yeah,
have. You're right. It would have a good, significant impact. In other words, if you were to make another, which has come up before, they've talked about going to Honduras and doing a deal, building a canal up there. The Chinese have talked about that. I don't think the United States wants.
yeah.
We don't want the Chinese anywhere
Yeah,
in
Nicaragua. They were talking
North.
about doing it in Nicaragua.
Yeah, Nicaragua too. So I mean, it will definitely have a great, not a small effect, but a great effect if there was another canal built
Yeah,
above Panama, for example, as Jim just said, in Nicaragua.
So,
yeah.
Panama,
so,
And I mean,
Panama. I think
we've
ships would go there, but Panama would lose a lot of money still.
yeah.
so to
Well,
Chris
we've already talked
Clark
about.
comment, right, and the fees, right, you got to keep the fees in
Mhm.
check. Would you
We've
not
already
agree,
talked about
Emilio?
going down the old way, down below South America through the Straits of Magellan, and how much time that extends
Hmm.
the shipping route, the shipping time. But if we go back a moment ago or a bit ago, before the Panama Canal was built, the way they used to get goods across there was where they would bring the ships in on one side, unload them to carts on donkeys. Granted, today it'd be a bit more sophisticated, and then they would bear them across land to the ships waiting on the other side, and then load them back on those ships and continue the journey both directions. Now, something like that, what would a land journey to move those goods would even be worth the investment? You know, at that point, your ships, land, ships. I mean, how much would that extend it? I don't know, but I mean, those are your
So,
options: going over the land, building a new canal, or going through the Straits of Magellan, which we already know the Straits of Magellan is going to, triple the time, if not,
Yeah.
double or triple the time.
yeah, so I know that the Chinese were involved in an agreement with the Panamanian for the land bridge initiative, right? To do
Hmm.
exactly what you were talking about, Jim, about transporting goods across the land, 51 miles, right?
Hmm.
And they said that they can increase the throughput of containers 5 million additional containers per year. So, but I know that after Secretary Rubio paid a visit to Panama, that the Panamanians have pulled out of that agreement with the Chinese.
Correct. You're absolutely correct. And going back to what Jim was mentioning in reference to, how much more containers can we get that way? Panama has a road. When I was a kid, there's a road that travels from Panama City from the Pacific side to the Atlantic side. Um, I can't remember exactly what the name of the road is called, but it's basically like the little interstate. It's like, remember when we were kids and before infrastructure kind of, I don't know, I'm telling my age, I was born in 67. So, living in the States, there's areas where you have one road going and one road coming, right? Two lanes, right? You're either going north or coming south. And so there's a road like that. And there's a railway there also. But that road has not really, I mean, I think it's two lanes now, but they really haven't invested in making that road like a interstate highway like here we got here in the States. Had they done that, that would be another way to get some of the ships, some of those containers a little
Yeah.
faster down to the other way,
Now,
because
I'm sorry,
no.
what would the investment, would the investment of coming up with another transportation route be worth any effect it's going to have on the local economy, the Panamanian economy? I mean, would it benefit them? And if it did, how long would it take? Because developing these alternate routes is going to take time. We know that. Look how long it took to build the canal
Yeah.
itself.
I mean, there's already, I think the infrastructure is there. It's just room for the improvement of those infrastructures
Hmm.
in order to add to the amount of ships that are coming through. Of course, you got, like you said, you got those ports on both sides on the Pacific and the Atlantic side. It's just a matter of You know, let me go back and say this real quick. You always hear these things about these countries that have a lot of issues government wise. We got a lot of crooked politicians in Panama.
Hey, we got a lot of crooked
I mean,
politicians in the United
we
States.
really need to go into that.
So the reason why I bring that up is because some of this money that we're talking about isn't like, doesn't get to where it needs to get because somebody in between is stuffing something in their pocket.
Absolutely. Yeah. We have
So
that problem here too. Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely.
So when we talk about the fact that we're talking about infrastructure, we're talking about, you know, how is this going to make Panama better? I don't think there's a really true answer how it's going to make the country better because until you get rid of the crooks and you take them out of the equation, you know, you want
Hmm.
to think that somebody is going to come and sit down and say, you know what, we need to do this. But as soon as they get in office, their eyes get big, dollar signs get big, and they forget their values and their morals and what they really went there for. It's the same issue. The
Yeah,
Panamanian government has a lot of that.
yeah. So Emilio, getting back on track though about the Chinese influence
Yes.
in Panama. Let's get
Yeah.
back on track on that, right?
Okay.
They have a huge influence, right? The contract in 1979 was signed, right? And they just renewed it, and it's good till 2047 for both ports, right? And that was concerning. In 2017, they renewed that contract for 30 years with the Chinese, right? To me, at least, it's concerning,
Mm-hmm.
right? So now they have these contracts in place, and as far as I'm concerned, they have a lock, no pun intended, on the ability to potentially control the Panama Canal. So let's go back. Let's go to the hotbed statement about Trump saying that we're going to take control of the Panama Canal. We've all read the treaty from 1979, right?
Treaty.
We know the roles and responsibilities, and we know that we're not just going to unilaterally go and take control of the Panama Canal because it breaks international law. There's so many issues with that. But be rest assured, my belief is that President Trump's initiative to say that is, China, if you mess around with the Panama Canal, according to that treaty, we are going to use our mighty power of the United States to make sure that there's free flow of goods across the Panama Canal. What's your take on that?
My take is on there. I think the Panamanian government are always taking a step once Rubio went down there to number one, they backed out of the contract. The contract is no longer void, is voided. Um, and they did that because they know that the treaty shows that if the United States feels like an adversary is coming over to take control of, they have the right to step in. And that's exactly what the treaty says. So that being said, with Panama backing out of it, I think I think the government fully understands that that's not an avenue that they want to go. So now the next thing is who is going to fulfill the contract on those two ports. You know, I don't know if the United States, huh?
I'm saying they backed out of the land bridge initiative, but the ports are still controlled by the Chinese today.
Well, isn't that part of the land bridge initiative?
No,
Those
sir.
ports that they.
No, those are separate contracts for the ports.
Okay, so those are separate contracts for the ports. I guess it would have to be the Chinese company that owns those ports. From what I understand, this dude is 97 years old, but his son is now running it. I would have to say that they would have to find a company to buy that company out.
Yeah.
I mean, I me personally, I do believe that because even though it is family-owned business that owns it, even though they're from China. Remember, I I think the Chinese government has their hand in all the businesses, no matter if they're from China or not. So that's a very disturbing look, and I understand why people would think that way. But the only way is just if another company comes and buys it out. And I don't believe we have any companies in the United States that actually run or own any access of any ports.
So Emilio, do we want to cover the Trump hotels associated with this? Do you want to get into those details today? Because we're rounding into the last 10 minutes. I know that was an
Uh,
important point that you had brought up to me.
no,
And
we'll just go. Well, real quick. I think why don't we just go along with the part of with the third thing at the Panama Canal,
sure, we
which
can
is
do
what
that.
Jim brought up.
Yeah.
Um, I wanted to bring up the fact that there was a lot of money that was borrowed in order to do that. The financing sources for that for financing a number of the multilateral developments of for that was by the Japanese Bank of the International Corporation. They gave up $8 million, invested $8 million. The European Investment Bank invested $5 million. The Inter-American Development Bank invested $4 million. Bank of Latin America and the Caribbeans invested $3 million, and of course, the International Finance Corporation invested $3 million. So none of that money came from China, thank God, to help restructure and build the third lock that they needed for to be able to help the bigger vessels get through. Um, and as we know, there was a lot of hands on deck as far as engineers and companies that were involved, none which were China, but mostly a European country, I believe from Denmark or Finland, that helped construct the new locks that were built, and also the England and the United States engineers were heavily involved in that. You got a question,
Awesome.
Jim?
No, I'm taking it in.
Yeah, so I was looking that up, and it's interesting because it was a consortium between a few countries that built the third lane,
Mhm.
which is quite interesting. So yeah, I think it's been a great conversation.
Yeah.
I think we can all agree on one thing, whether it is in Panama or in the United States or anywhere else in Africa, the Chinese influence in the everywhere, right, is alarming, right? I mean, we can get into probably a whole nother subject about the Chinese buying land in the United States near strategic military bases and farming and things of that nature, right? So the Chinese influence across the globe is concerning, right? So that's that Chinese perspective of, we take a hammer to everything we do, and yet, it looks like the Chinese are taking a scalpel and doing it very meticulously, right? I think we can
Precise.
all agree on that.
They're playing the long game. They're playing the
Yeah.
long game is what they're
Yeah.
doing.
Yeah. And then I think we all agree that the statement made by President Trump on Inauguration Day was a little extreme. I think all three of us could agree on that. However, I think he opened everybody's eyes wide open to the influence that the Chinese do have globally, right?
Correct.
And
Yeah.
and
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 I
and,
think
and
that's
I
a
think it's
lot of
important.
that's a lot of his strategy too, is just I'm just going to throw something out there so ridiculous. It's so far-fetched. I have no intention of doing it, but I'm going to get conversation started. I'm going to get people thinking, and eventually I'm going to get talked down to what I really do want.
And I believe that that's what the Panamanian people are upset about. it's just like, you throw stuff out there and it kind of reflects from that.
Yeah. I don't think we have the right to just march into a sovereign country, because you talked to Emilio earlier about them fearing for their sovereignty. Us walking in there with military force to another country, and I don't like that at all.
Yeah, I don't like it either, but I can guarantee if the Chinese did restrict flow of goods through that canal, I think that they would highly welcome, and Emilio, I'd be interested in your take on this. I think they'd
Yeah.
highly welcome military
but at what
intervention
degree?
in the United States.
I think if,
assistance.
if China walked in there to try to take it over, oh yes. I think if they walked in there with the military force, Chinese did, trying to take over over the Panama Canal, I definitely agree that any country that, there's a lot of countries that don't want the United States involvement, but as soon as something happens in their country where they need the United States involvement, they're happy to have it.
Yeah, what is it back when in the Roman Empire, Roman troops never set foot in Rome? They wouldn't let them, because once they're in,
Yep.
once they're in, boy, that's it.
Yep.
You got a problem. So I have no problem with them going in, helping, securing the region, and then stepping back out. Maybe leave a little presence behind for peacekeeping, just in case they decide to get crazy again. But leave the sovereignty to the Panamanian people. Leave them their country.
So,
Jim, go ahead, Emilio.
So really quick, as the topic was, whose canal it really truly is, it belongs to the Panamanian people, and the Panamanian people should be proud of that. But they should also take into consideration that they have a gateway to the Americas that they needs to be protected, and it needs to be protected from other countries coming in and disturbing the flow of goods and products that have that how you say provide a livelihood for all of us in the world.
100%.
Mm-hmm.
Emilio, I just want to say it's been great having you on the podcast today.
Yeah.
I mean, even though we had a basic discussion about this, I learned more today. Even though we were doing research, I still learned more today from some of the stuff that you brought up. Jim, what's your take on that?
It's amazing. Always that was the whole point of this, is to learn meet new people like Emilio, learn things that I hadn't known before, share opinions. And I watched some videos last night just over and over and over again on Panama, watching the construction, watching the politics, and I was hooked. I was watching it all evening. It's some good stuff. I'll throw one point out there that I did not know, is when the Panama Canal was being built, there was a ship being built that at the time was going to be the largest passenger ship in the world. So when they built the Panama Canal, they built those locks to be able to accommodate that ship. You know what ship it was? RMS Titanic. I did not know that.
Yeah. That's an interesting thing there to imagine. It never got there.
Never got
there, as we all know. Well, Emilio, thanks for being on the podcast today. We really enjoyed having you.
Thank you very much.
It's been good, and we really enjoyed having you on here. And like to the people listening, we want to make you realize that, hey, we'd love to have you on as a guest on our podcast, right? We want to know what you're passionate about. What are you passionate about? What is it that you want to communicate to folks out there on the internet that really drives you, right? We want to have that conversation. So please feel free to reach out to myself or Jim, or go to our Facebook page, the Signal Brothers. Let us know, and we'll set up an appointment just like I did with Emilio. Emilio, was it painful to talk to us about the Panama Canal and set up this podcast?
No, it was great. It was great. Conversation. I see we see eye to eye on a lot of things. So it was an enjoyment to have this topic and speak with you guys today.
Awesome.
Absolutely.
So I hope we get some other people on, and we'd love to expand the subjects, right? We keep on nugging our head to come together with subjects that we think people would be interested in, but we'd love to know from the viewers. What do you want us to have a podcast about? And do you want to be a guest? Even if you don't want to be a guest, let us know the subjects you'd love to hear about, and we'll be happy to tackle them. And really, we want to make this thing grow and really have content that people want to hear.
Yep.
Well, I'm Kevin.
And I'm Jim.
And we're the Signal Brothers.